Hi, kids. I'm glad that you could join me once again as we learn a story from the book of Joshua in our Bibles. Now, today I have a very special report for you from Mr. E and Gid the Kid, and actually, it's back when Millie Graham was their director. So we're pulling a video or we're pulling a report from the archives and giving you a never seen before news report from early on in Joshua and Israel's time seeking to conquer the promised land. Here it is.
We're
Back, 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 back in style. What's up, Promised Land? This is Mr. E. And over there, that guy is Gid the Kid. And we are the Promised Land news station.
Today we have breaking news on a new development in the Israel story. And you wouldn't believe it, but we just so happened to be strolling through the promised land when we came across Israel's leader, Joshua, and some other guy right before they were about to attack Jericho.
Yeah, Gid and I had just gotten back from our favorite sandwich shop, ZC Herb's Spectacular Sandwiches. You should try one. But anyways, we're walking back to the studio, stuck full, and Gid starts pointing at some guy about 100 yards away or so. And at first, I'm thinking it was our director catching us on an extended lunch break. And to my relief and amazement, there stands the mighty Joshua.
Yes, there was Joshua. Now it's time for a short commercial break, and then we will be reporting on what took place with Joshua, Israel's leader, when we saw him.
And cut.
Oh no, I am in trouble.
You got that right, you are. How come you think you can confess on live television that you're taking extended lunch breaks behind my back and you don't think I'll find out?
Well, I forgot that you'd be watching, ma'am. Director.
I'm right here with you in the studio.
Yeah, come on, Mr. E. You got us busted.
And anyways, what in the world is ZC Herb Spectacular Sandwiches?
You know that new sandwich shop down on Main Street in Jericho?
You mean the one that has a closed sign on it?
What? Closed? They're the best! Mr. E, where are we going to take our extra lunch breaks now?
Get the Kid, you aren't taking any more lunch breaks. From now on, we will be eating here in the studio. You can get your lunch from the vending machine. Okay, here we go. We are on in 3, 2, 1.
Welcome back, everyone. You can ignore the commercial that aired right before we came back on for ZC Herb's Spectacular Sandwich Shop, as we have gotten word that they are closed. Closed for good. I personally am hoping that maybe ZC Herb will open a spectacular soup shop or spectacular sushi shop, because he's cool. So cool.
Okay, Mr. E, enough with that, and enough of sharing your wishes on live television. Anyway, we've got news to report. Anyways, if we don't get to it, we'll hear from the director.
True. Okay, so as we were saying before the commercial break, there we are, Gid the Kid and Mr. E walking through the promised land. And there's Joshua standing there with another man who has his sword drawn.
Oh yeah, I forgot about the sword. At first, we thought we were about to experience a duel, but then we saw them taking, and all of a sudden, Joshua bowed down, and then he was taking off his sandals. We had no clue what was going on.
Gid, you won't believe what just occurred to me. You know how Joshua was taking off his sandals? That wasn't the first time that was done. Do you remember who else we heard of that did that?
Randolphi.
No, not Randolphi. Moses, the leader of Israel before Joshua. Remember the burning bush? How God spoke to him out of the bush that was on fire but wasn't burning up? Moses took off his sandals too. There's got to be a connection.
Well, folks, that's our breaking news report for today. I'm Gid the Kid.
And I'm Mr. E for the Promised Land News Station.
Signing off.
Good work, you two.
Really? Thank you.
Yes, that was better. I wonder what was really going on with Joshua and that other man.
Hmm, yeah. If only we had a reporter. Someone to interview them. Hmm, maybe one day.
I guess we'll never know what really took place.
Well, actually, we do know, because that story that Mr. E and Gid the Kid reported with Joshua and the man with his sword drawn and Joshua worshiping him is actually found in our Bibles, in the book of Joshua in chapter 5. If you have your Bibles, you can turn there with me to Joshua chapter 5, and we'll be starting at verse 13. So this passage takes place right before Joshua and Israel start going into the promised land to conquer it, having battles and fighting the people in the promised land. So it's right before their first battle. You remember which one that was? It was the Battle of Jericho. So we'll start reading at verse 13 of Joshua chapter 5. Verse 13 says, When Joshua was by Jericho, he lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, a man was standing before him with his sword, with his drawn sword in his hand. And Joshua went to him and said to him, Are you for us or for our adversaries? And he said, No, but I am the commander of the army of the Lord. Now I have come. And Joshua fell on his face to the earth and worshipped and said to him, What does my Lord say to his servant? And the commander of the Lord's army said to Joshua, Take off your sandals from your feet, for the place where you are standing is holy. And Joshua did so. So we find out that this man with a sword with Joshua is the commander of the Lord's army. This man is someone who is representing God or is God himself. We see then in Joshua 6, so chapter 6, the next chapter, verses 2 through 5, that God gives Joshua directions and tells him that he will give Israel victory. Imagine that Joshua and Israel are about to have to fight the promised land, and the commander of the Lord's army shows up and tells Joshua all these things. What a comfort, what a relief this would have been to Joshua. I also want you to notice how Joshua responds to the commander of the Lord's army. He bows. He worships the commander of the Lord's army, and he takes off his sandals when the commander of the Lord's army tells him the place where he's standing is holy ground. We learn from this that it was very important that Joshua realized and remembered who God is as they went into the promised land. That Joshua was to worship, he was to follow God, that this was ultimately God who would bring them victory in Israel. Joshua was taught a very important lesson as he went into the promised land, to have a view of God in which he realizes how much greater God was than he was, and that he needs to trust God as he goes into the promised land. So what do we learn for us today? Well, first we should ask ourselves the question, what do we think about God? Do you think he should be worshiped? Do you think he is far greater than you? And then second, I'd ask you, do you rely on God in all that you do? God was teaching Joshua a very, very important lesson that as he went into the promised land, as he went into these battles and led Israel, that he needed to rely, he needed to depend, to trust on God. Not on himself, not on his army, but on God. He was teaching him this by having the commander of the Lord's army show up to Joshua. And we actually saw in the past weeks that Joshua didn't always trust God. He did pretty good, and oftentimes he did look to the Lord. But I don't know if you can think of an example, but I'll mention one. Think about the Gibeonites when they tricked Joshua. Joshua didn't look to the Lord. He didn't ask God what he should do. He didn't ask God for help. And we see he didn't rely on God there. So I'd ask you, are you relying on God in your life? So that's the commander of the Lord's army. Next week, we'll close out our children's Bible lessons by looking at what happens after the book of Joshua. And we'll be looking at that by seeing one last report from the promised land news station.